Okay, welcome everybody to this session of our EpiDoc training program. And in this session, Gabriel Bodar of the University of London is going to show how to mark up a Greek inscription by using the Oxygen XML editor. So please, Gabby, go ahead.
Cool, thank you. Let me share my screen. So there it is. So what I'm going to do first is, if you're doing this as an exercise, you will have a copy of the EpiDoc XML template, which will have shown you where to find. And I've put that template and a copy of the EpiDoc schema in a folder on my desktop, so that I can validate to that local schema. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this EpiDoc template and rename it to test inscription 1 or whatever, just to give it another name, so that when I work on my second test, my third practice inscription, I've got multiple files rather than renaming the EpiDoc template and working directly in that. So I'm going to open this template inscription in Oxygen. It opens in Oxygen by default for me, but it won't for you yet. So I've opened it in Oxygen. I've also made the font very large to make it slightly more legible for you watching this now. When you open Oxygen, the font will be much smaller. But even with a much smaller font, these bars on either side of the screen, there's a project bar over here, and there's an attributes bar over here. I find those a little bit unnecessary and unhelpful. So what I always do is I just get rid of those. I just absolutely don't want those. So you can just get rid of those, and that makes the whole screen is filled with the text. The other thing you might do is, because lines in XML can get quite long, and as you've seen here, you can see on here already some of these lines go off the edge of the screen. And so one thing that I like to do, and again, you may not, so this is an option for you, I like to go to Options, Preferences, Editor, Edit Modes, Text, and say Line Wrap. Select Line Wrap, and what that does is that makes these lines all fit in the width of the screen. So they wrap, and this makes it sometimes makes it look a little bit messier, but it does mean you don't have to scroll to the left and right to find your text, and you don't have to insert new lines in the middle of your text just to make the lines wrap, which can make it then more confusing and more difficult to find things later. But that's an option you may or may not like to do it that way. So I've now got my XML file open, and a couple of things before I go and find a Greek inscription to start working on in here. The first is that, as I said, I put in my folder where the XML file is a copy of the EpiDoc schema. This is because by default we point at the EpiDoc schema online. You can see in here the URL of that schema, epidoc.stoa.org/schema/latest ti epidoc rng, and that means every time I want to validate, it has to go to the web, validate against that schema, and that can sometimes take a bit of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete the main part of that URL and just leave the file name, because that's the same file name that I have in my folder on the desktop. And this means I'm validating against a local copy in Oxygen. The only difference this makes is while I'm editing it. Obviously, when this file is being processed, the schema is recognized as being EpiDoc regardless. So that again is something you might do if you find validating is taking a little while. This just speeds things up a little bit sometimes. So I'm saving that. Note that I've set up my my keyboard so that when I type a command function there, it appears in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen as when I just saved my file by pressing Command S. So that appears there. So that's sometimes a clue. And then we're going to ignore, for the purposes of this demonstration, all of this stuff here in the TI header, which other parts of the workshop will talk about. And I'm just going to go to this part of the text here, the div type equals edition. This is where the Greek or Latin or whatever other language you're working in text will go, in our case, a Greek text. And obviously this bit of text here that says Greek or Latin text here is just a placeholder, so we should get rid of that. And this is where we're going to put the text that we want to mark up. Okay, so I'm going to go now and find some text to mark up. I've chosen a text already from the Ancient Inscriptions of the Northern Black Sea project. I'm putting the URL at the bottom of the screen a little bit larger for you, if you want to go and find that text and follow along. And again, we'll ignore all the data about this text. All we want here is the Greek text, which is this 11 lines of Greek and 10 lines of Greek and a little bit of a couple of lines of lacuna either side. So I'm simply going to copy and paste that entire text. You might want to keep this document open because this document will also have such things such as the image of the text down here. It'll have a diplomatic view of the text in case you want to figure out what's actually going on the stone, as opposed to bits that have been restored and so forth. And if you want to cheat, there's also an XML view in there. But let's not use that for the moment. So I've copied that that bit of Greek text. Going back into my Oxygen XML editor, I'm simply going to paste it after this LB n equals ron. Remember that in EpiDoc, every line of the addition has to begin with an LB element, a line begins element. So I'm simply going to paste in those 13 or so lines, 12, I think it is, lines of text in there. 10 of them are lines of Greek and 2 of them are other things. To make this a little bit easier to see, I'm just going to indent those lines so they're indented the same as the others. You see what I mean, that the XML is soon going to be wider than the screen, which is why I wanted to have that line wrap feature on in my text. If you don't have that, you can of course make your line wrap manually by simply putting in new line characters in between words and so forth. So as I'm going to go through this, I will explain what I'm doing. I will describe what I'm doing. You'll be able to see my keystrokes in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, but you might also like to follow along with the EpiDoc QuickRef document that we've shared with you. You can't really see it on this screen, but I'm not going to keep going back and forth to it. And this is just as a reminder, this is something you might want to look at. So when you find square brackets, you can use this to remember how we render those in EpiDoc. So I'm going to let me fill the screen here. Just to make this a little bit more legible, I'm going to go through and I'm going to replace each piece of human readable markup, which is the Leiden conventions and similar features, with machine readable XML markup to be absolutely transparent. The first thing I want to do in this text is precisely because, as we said a minute ago, the lines can get quite long in EpiDoc. Once we've tagged various features, the line will easily get longer than a screen. We may end up wrapping, and it'll be quite hard to remember where exactly we are, but once that happens. So the first thing I want to do is I want to replace the visual feature of starting each line of the text on a new line in the addition with an explicit XML feature of saying this is where the line of the addition begins. Okay, and we already have that entered for us in this document for the first line, LB n equals 1. And we'll come back to that n equals 1 in a minute. And so I'm going to put another one here at the beginning of the second line of the addition. Now you may remember from the earlier introduction to Oxygen that there are 2 or 3 ways to enter an element in your file. The first is simply to start typing. Type an angle bracket. It knows it's an element, so it gives you a menu there of all elements. Type the first couple of letters of the element. In this case, LB is only 2 letters long, and then you can simply select it from that list, and it gives you LB. It knows LB is an empty element, so it doesn't give you a closing tag. It simply gives you this slash in there to say this is an empty element, and we can put in the attribute. Remember that to enter an attribute, you put a space after the element name, and again, you'll get a drop-down list offered to you by Oxygen. Simply type n, and it gives you the n in there. We put n equals 2, for example. The other way to enter an element, incidentally, you may recall, is to type Command and E, which has appeared in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen there. And select the element from that list or type the name of the element, and again, it'll do the same thing. In this case, for some reason, it's given us an opening tag and a closing tag, and we can get rid of that closing tag simply by putting the slash character there at the end of the opening tag, which means that this is an empty element and therefore it doesn't need a closing tag. And then we can put in an n attribute by pressing space, n equals, and whatever number we want to put in there. The third and laziest way to put in an element is simply to copy an existing element and paste it. And lazy in almost all computer contexts is a virtue. It's something that you want to achieve. So I'm actually going to paste this LB at the beginning of every line. And then I can go in and change the line number because it's a lot quicker than entering it manually each time, and a lot more straightforward. On the question of line numbering, we'll notice that line 5 in this edition is actually the 6th line of the edition. See, these line numbers they're in margin 5 and 10 there. So if I'd carried on numbering 1, 2, 3, I'd have got to line 5 here, and it would have been line 6 here. So what the editor has clearly done here is decided that the line that that has no Greek on it doesn't have a number. Okay, so the first line and the last line are not numbered. They're just line beginnings as you know, as part of the edition, but not as part of the text. So the line numbers actually go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 matches up with that. And here is where we've got the human readable markup for line 5 is already there. So I'm going to delete that. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the human readable 10 in plain text, I'm going to delete. Okay, so we've now got the numbers line 1 to 10 numbered, and the first line and the last line are not numbered. The other thing to look at in terms of the lines just quickly is that a few of these lines are lines that appear mid-word. In other words, they are line breaks, but they are not word breaks. And the first case of that is this the line beginning of line 4 is the middle of a word. So this is the word deetai, and the hyphen, slightly confusingly, the hyphen is here at the end of de, the broken word, not at the end of the entire line, because the Vacat is not part of the missing word. That hyphen should really be there. So again, the hyphen is the human readable markup, which I'm going to delete, and the machine readable markup that I'm going to add is a space here after the previous attribute, and break equals no. So this line beginning is not considered breaking. Okay, it breaks a line, but it does not break the word. Similarly, line beginning number 5 doesn't break the word thus. And you notice that the second time I entered the break attribute, it was a lot quicker because I didn't have to scroll down and select it. It was already at the top of the list. It said, well, that's what you did last time. Maybe that's what you want to do again. You'll see that more clearly again here. At Telean, I typed the space. Break is now the first attribute that's offered, because even though it's not the first in alphabetical order, because that's the last thing I entered. No is the only value offered for the attribute, and I want to delete that hyphen in there. I think those are all the hyphens in this text. Oh no, there's one more here, line 7. Break, enter, no, and herodoru doesn't need the hyphen anymore because that's now, information is now replaced by the attribute. Okay, starting at the top of the document again, we have up here square brackets surrounding 3 dashes. What this clearly means is that the text is broken here. There are some number of lines missing from the top of the inscription. And if you, again, this is the human readable markup, the Leiden conventions, which we're going to remove, and we're going to replace them with the machine readable XML conventions, which is a gap element. in this case I've typed, I could have entered using Command E. Gap has a required attribute. So if I go to the thing and press space, it gives me the option of all the attributes, and you'll see on that list that the attribute reason is one of those that's offered. And because this gap was in square brackets, we know that means that it was lost. So that's the only required attribute on the element according to the schema, but according to the conventions, we know that we need two more attributes. We need to know not only that the gap was lost, but what sort of a gap it was. A gap of an unknown number of lines is different from a gap of a certain number of characters, for example. So we have the unit, this is a gap of lines, and the quantity of those lines, well, we can't give a quantity because quantity has to be a number and we don't know how many that is. So what I actually want is the extent of those lines, and the value of extent that we need for this case is unknown. Now, I guess I could look at the commentary and look at the photograph and see actually if it really is an unknown or an unspecified number of lines, or if they're actually just saying there's one line missing. But I think in this case they're probably saying it's an unspecified number of lines, because this is a fragment from the middle of an inscription. There's a lot missing on the left, and so we have no idea how much is missing at the top and the bottom. So I think this is right. While we're here, this lacuna down at the bottom here, which is displayed exactly the same, is also means there's an unknown number of lines lost from the bottom of the text, and using my virtuous laziness, I'm going to copy and paste that that element and repeat it precisely down at the bottom there. There are several more gaps which actually are displayed exactly the same, square brackets with 3 dashes in, but these cannot mean an unknown number of lines, or even any number of lines, because they appear on a line which also has some text. So this clearly, the variant of the Leiden conventions that this editor has chosen, and the editor whose text we're copying has chosen, is ambiguous. It's not distinguishing between the two different kinds of gap. It doesn't need to, because we can tell from the whether there are characters on the line as well. But some versions of Leiden do make that distinction, so it's just worth keeping an eye on that. So what we have here in this case is at the beginning of line 1, there is a gap of an unspecified number of characters. So again, I delete the human readable version of that, and I put in a gap element, reason lost. It's an empty element, so I get rid of that closing angle bracket. Quantity, so unit is, rather than line, is character, and extent again is unknown. Okay. And I think at the beginning of line 2, at the beginning of line 3, at the end of line 10, we have exactly the same situation. So again, I'm going to copy and paste that gap. In fact, by triple clicking on the name of the element, the entire element is selected in Oxygen. That makes it slightly easier for me to be sure I haven't accidentally gone a character too far or too short in my selection. So I'm going to paste that gap there. You see this line of XML has now already become longer than the page. I'm going to paste in a gap here. I'm going to put that square bracket back just to remind me that that was there. There's a gap down here at the end of a line, and I guess this gap here, which is not at the beginning of a line, is still a gap of unknown number of characters. And there's another one here in the middle of the line. Put the square bracket back in both of those cases to not forget that that's what's going on there. I think I've got all the gaps. Irene, remind me if I miss anything. But I think I've got all the gaps.
I think they're
all the gaps that are restoring lacunae at any rate in here. I have found and am restoring, replacing with XML. There is one other gap one other lacuna in this text, however. There's a lacuna here of 2 characters, but which is not a lacuna because the characters are completely lost, but it is 2 unrestored characters because they are sufficiently damaged, or it may be that they're sufficiently incompetently executed. We can't tell from the line, but I suspect in this case it's damaged because the rest of this text is very damaged. That they're too damaged for the editor to be comfortable restoring those letters. So those 2 dots, which would in Latin epigraphy they would be little crosses, but in Greek epigraphy dots are slightly more common, are also a form of gap. So I'm going to enter again a gap element with reason in this case is not lost, but reason is illegible. Okay, they're too damaged to be legible. Again, I'm going to put in a slash character here to make this an empty element and get rid of the closing tag. A space after that to enter a new attribute. The extent, the unit of this gap is characters, and in this case the quantity of those characters is known. It's quantity 2. Okay, so we don't use extent unknown, we use quantity 2 for this case. And I think that's the only instance of illegible characters in here that I can see.
I think there was one at line 2 or 3. At line 1.
Oh, there is one on line 1. Yes, very good, very well spotted. Thank you. Okay, and that's 1 illegible character. So I am again in virtuous laziness going to copy this gap by triple clicking. Copy this gap tag from down there. I'm going to put it up here, and I'm going to change the quantity from 2 to 1 just to make that a little bit quicker than doing it all again. Okay, there are a bunch more square brackets in here, and each square bracket, each pair of square brackets with characters in represents a span of lacuna which has been restored by the editor. So in this case, there is a whole lot of lacuna at the beginning of line 3. The editor doesn't know what fills the entire lacuna, but the last 3 letters of that lacuna must be the word "an," because that's what fits grammatically and contextually in that sentence. Here again, I'm here because this is not an empty element, unlike all the elements we've entered so far. I'm not going to start typing the element to get it in. I'm going to use the second variant of entering an element, which is to press Command E. So again, see the bottom left-hand corner of the screen for my keystroke. And I'm going to enter the supplied element. And supplied, you can see, is underlined in red because it is missing a required attribute. And the required attribute is reason. And reason with square brackets must always be lost. So supplied reason lost around "an" with close supplied at the end. The square brackets are now redundant, so I'm going to remove those. And I'm going to go through and do the same thing for all the other instances of square brackets in here. I'm not going to narrate it every time I do it because you can see the general principle. Reason lost. Delete those square brackets. To make this a little bit more quick, supplied, reason lost. You can see how quickly I can enter supplied reason lost because each of those is the same value as what I did last time. So it's obviously offered by Oxygen as the default value. Space gives me reason, enter reason gives me lost. Where's this closing square bracket there? Just as an aside, this in this case doesn't save me a lot of time, but if I'm entering the same element again and again and again, there is also a keystroke in Oxygen that allows you to enter the same element you entered last time immediately in a position. So rather than pressing Command and E as I did before, I'm going to press Command and the slash character, again, see in the bottom left-hand corner where that appears, and you see the supplied element appears immediately. That's only saved me one keystroke as it happens, because supplied would have been the first thing offered. But it's if I'm doing this 100 times, that's, you know, one keystroke each time is nevertheless saving time. So reason lost, get rid of those square brackets. A lot of these, it's getting kind of tedious, isn't it? That's I'm going to do them all in, do them as quickly as possible. And if I miss the wrong keystroke there, there's several in one line here. Is that the lot? It's a bit hard to see, isn't it? Then I want to get rid of all those square brackets. There must be a quicker way to get rid of all these square brackets. I could just find and replace and get rid of all the square brackets, but that would potentially, if I'd missed any, that would obscure that fact from me. But let's just get rid of these. If I've forgotten any, I'll pick them up as I go through it again, looking for other things. The next thing I want to find on here, this is now becoming pretty hard to read, as you can see. The XML is not human readable anymore. This is really quite messy. The next thing I want to enter is here on line 1. Let's go back to the top of the text. Here on line 1, we have a capital delta with an underdot and a capital upsilon with an underdot. There are two separate things going on here with this delta. One, the underdot is telling us that this is unclear and therefore is potentially ambiguous. It's being entered as a delta, but it could in theory be something else. And the other, the fact that it's uppercase in this particular variant of the Leiden conventions means that we're unable to interpret this character. It's essentially being transcribed diplomatically. There's probably a delta here, but is it part of a word? Is it part of a name? Is it part of a number? We can't really say. It could be the beginning of a word, the end of a word. This is something that we encode in EpiDoc as the what have I done? Sorry, gone to the top of the text. This is in EpiDoc is replaced with the orig element. So I press Command E to get up my menu of elements, and I put in an orig tag up there. We also then have the underdot, which I'm going to delete and replace with Command E unclear inside the orig. So there's the character, the unclear element always is the one that's closest to the character, because that's the one saying this character is incomplete. Orig then is an interpretive, so that's descriptive. Orig is interpretive. So unclear is descriptive, orig is interpretive. It's saying I can't interpret it, but nevertheless, that's an interpretive statement. The same here, so I'm going to start with unclear this time, and then around the unclear, so again, I can select the whole unclear by triple clicking on it, and I can put the orig element around that. So that's all of that on the first two lines. I think there's another underdot down here on this line, which I can simply replace with unclear. Someone else may have to point out any other underdots on there because they're very hard to see. Unclear, I'm going to enter using Command / there. There's another unclear here. Command /. If I spot any more underdots later, I will add them when we come to them. Let's go back up to the top of the text here. I think the first thing on the text I find now here is this Vac1 lit. This is not part of the transcription. This doesn't mean there are Latin characters on this Greek inscription. What this means is this is a Vacat of one character, a space left uninscribed of one character at the end of this line. This is something you'll more commonly see in Greek inscriptions than Latin inscriptions. Latin inscriptions tend not to be quite so interested in, Latin epigraphers tend not to be quite so interested in when there's a bit of space at the beginning or end of a line, because it's so common. So that entire piece of human readable Vac1 lit is going to be deleted and replaced with an XML tag space, which is an empty element and has a quantity of 1 and a unit of character. These are the same attributes you remember from the gap element earlier. So this is getting very hard to read and to see, to spot things in. So please do tell me if I've missed anything. I can't see anything on line 5 that's untagged. That dot in the middle there is Greek punctuation. It's not an underdot or a missing character or anything. Another Vac1 lit down here. Let's be lazy and copy and paste that space. Oop. Copy that space. Another Vac1 lit down here. Yep. Paste that other space in there. Have I missed any characters up above? I don't think so. I see an underdot. Line 9, I see another underdot. Note that I'm using, after that first one I entered, I'm now using Command/ to enter the underdots because that's much quicker. That, oh, wait a minute, there's 2 more underdots down here. Note that I can put a single unclear tag around 2 underdotted characters. That's perfectly legal, and those underdotted characters as uppercase characters are also ORIG. So we can use Command/ to tag that a second time. Have I got everything in here, Irene?
I think there's an unclear at line 2, an epsilon.
Line 2,
which is underdotted.
Oh, yep, well spotted. Thank you.
Okay. Great.
And I think that's probably everything.
Yes.
Only one thing that some people might have done differently is that if we have a supplied element that overlaps multiple words, I'm not sure we do actually in here. So here, yes, we have the beginning of the word tutos is supplied, and this supplied element contains several words, including the beginning of the word tutos. If for some reason you were tagging individual words in this text, so you wanted to tag the word tutois for either just to lemmatize it or to add grammatical information, or because it was a significant word, and tutois is unlikely to be, but if it was a significant word like a title or an imperial office or something, and you might want to tag that, then we would have a problem with the overlapping with the supplied tag. So what people would often do here is they would close the supplied after a complete word and reopen it at the beginning of this word. And we need to give it reason lost. The fact that we have supplied, which normally involves open square brackets and close square brackets, and another supplied, which normally involves open square brackets and close square brackets, is not a problem in this case, as will be explained elsewhere in this tutorial. I think that's it. Apologies if I've forgotten anything, but that's quite a lot already. That should give you an idea of how to go about encoding your first inscription in Oxygen from here.
Great, thank you, Gabby.
Cool. Thank you.